Do you recall the time that you learned how to ride a bike? I do. I have a very vivid memory of it. It was a hot spring day, and my dad had just brought back a bike from Germany for me. My brother had attempted to teach me how to ride a bike for days. And that specific day, I remember him holding back to the back of the seat of the bike and saying, I know you can do this. And I started pedaling really, really, really hard. And all of a sudden, I heard him say, You got this. And his voice sounded really far away. So I turned, took a glance back, and I realized he was really far away and that I was riding my bike on my own. So the reason that memory stood out in my mind is because I'm 6 years old and the war in Bosnia is about to ignite. The next memory that I have is being woken up in the middle of the night and hearing explosions and feeling really scared and uncertain about what's happening. I remember being gathered by my parents and taken to my aunt's house. My aunt was one of the few in the neighborhood who had a basement. And as we got to her house and went down to the basement, it was an unfinished space. It was a bit musty, and it was just filled with friends and neighbors and other folks that we knew from our hometown. Anyone that didn't have a basement really just went and visited neighbors or friends and sought refuge. I remember the silence. I remember hearing them breathing. I remember the adults not talking to each other and just looking down. And I remember feeling scared for the very first time in my life and feeling that uncertainty. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but I did. And the next morning when I woke up to silence. There were no more bombings and no more explosions. And I was really hopeful that that might be the end of that terror. We made our way back to our home. Once we got to our house, my mom scavenged to the house and she picked up necessities, toothbrushes, a couple outfits. And I looked, I was standing on the side and I just looked at her and with a really probably confused look, not sure what she was doing. And she looked back at me and just said, everything's fine. I'm just grabbing a few things and we'll be back home in a couple days. That will be the last time that I left my home in Bosnia as a child. As we stepped outside of our house, I saw semi trucks and trailers that were just lined down our street and town, actually. The semi trucks the trailers were lined with benches inside, and some of our neighbors and family members had already taken their spots on the trailers. So I climbed inside of one of them and we made our way to Croatia. We were dropped off at the border of Croatia, and that was the time when we had to say goodbye to my dad. Men were not allowed to leave the country. They were expected to stay back and fight. And so it was a really difficult time because we weren't really sure when we were going to be able to see him again and whether he would be safe. We arrived at a home in Croatia, and I remember walking through it, and I remember seeing pictures of people that I didn't recognize. I remember seeing closets that were filled with clothes and a kitchen that was fully stocked. We stayed at that home for several months. It was several months later that my mom kind of described to me or explained to me why their stuff was still there. She said, honey, they left their home and sought refuge just the same way that we did. And so there's probably somebody in our home now seeking refuge. And that didn't really sit well with me. I wasn't very good at sharing. And just the thought of somebody playing with my toys, it was really difficult. Unfortunately, the war in the Balkans moved into Croatia, and we were once again forced to move. And we made our way to Slovenia. There had been a refugee camp that had been set up in Slovenia. I remember arriving there. I remember seeing the buildings just filled with other Bosnian refugees. I remember seeing tents outside with refugees who were waiting to have a location assigned to them. Our family was assigned to Ajdovština. The location or the camp was an abandoned military camp, actually, and had 4 buildings in the shape of a square and had a big basketball court in the middle. And the children would gather there in the evenings. It was truly there that I started kindergarten, made some of my first friends, and probably was forced to grow up a lot sooner than any child should. It was pretty soon after our arrival there that I realized that if I wanted a shower, it would have to be a community shower, and it was assigned at a certain time. I was terrified to go in and have to take my clothes off in front of other women and girls. And I just remember that fear and that uncertainty, as a 6-year-old. I remember my mom working at a grape vineyard. The food at the camp was not great. And so she really wanted to make some extra money to be able to buy bread and different things that she knew my brother and I would eat. We weren't allowed to have those things all the time, but she wanted to ensure that she could provide them for special occasions. So one of the most vivid memories that I have is one of those special occasions, and it was my first day of kindergarten. So school wasn't traditional. We knew that the war was going to take a while, so our parents wanted to make sure that we, learned how to write and read in Bosnian. And so they made a school and they created a little bit of structure and assigned teachers to us. And so on my first day of school, my mom made me some fried eggs, and I still remember the smell of them. I remember touching the fresh bread, and I just remember devouring the food. And my mom was waiting for me, and apparently I wasn't very quick at eating because she kept telling me to hurry up, that I was going to be late for my first day of school. And I remember turning around and just saying, "Mom, who cares about school when you've got such good food to eat?" So it's something that's really going to stand out in my mind. In the meantime, my dad had made his way to Germany and had started working there and saved enough money that he could pay a smuggler to come get us from Slovenia. I remember being woken up at 2 a.m. and being told to, get into a van with my mom and my brother. We were told to stay down and not raise our heads, and we were transported to Germany. I remember sleeping for most of the trip there, but I remember arriving in Germany and being given train tickets, and the person instructed us which station to get off on. So once we arrived at our destination, there was two men that were waiting on the side of the station, and my mom ran up to one of them and she gave them a hug and a kiss, and she ushered for us to come give your dad a hug and a kiss. And I looked at the man, and he looked nothing like my father. He had grown this big Viking beard, and I was just terrified of him. I wanted nothing to do with him. So once we got to our apartment in Germany, my dad immediately went and shaved. And once he came back out, I finally had my dad back and I could recognize him again. Unfortunately, our reunification was very short-lived. My dad was diagnosed with cancer 2 months after we arrived in Germany, and we lost him that fall. It was a really difficult year for my mom. She also lost her brother that year, and we lost many other friends and neighbors that same year. She was now widowed, a single mom, and had a lot of uncertainty about our futures. Where would she take us? Our home had been destroyed during the war, and unfortunately, the territory that our hometown is in was now in Serb territory. And she knew that she would not be able to provide us the life that she wanted us to have back home in Bosnia. So she had a cousin that had relocated to the United States, and the United States had opened for Bosnian refugees to resettle. So she went through the process, applied, and in February of '98 was approved. So in April 24th of 1998, to be exact, is when we landed in Des Moines, Iowa. That's not quite where my story ends, but I shared my story for the very first time at the onset of COVID. And the reason why I did is because I felt there were so many folks that were just really struggling with the uncertainty, the financial hardship, and even the mental hardship of being, stuck in your home and not really knowing what the future holds. And I continue to share my story now because I know that there's always somebody out there who's struggling, maybe another refugee that's really uncertain about where their place is in the United States or where their life may end up. But I think it's important for all of us to take a deep breath. It's important to hug those that are closest to us and know that better days are coming. So thank you for allowing me to share my story again.